Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skype a Scientist Live. My name is Sarah McAnulty. I'm the Executive Director of Skype a Scientist. And today we are super lucky to have the scientist, Leslie Hamachi, joining us. We will be talking today about polymer recycling and learning what the heck a polymer is and how you recycle it. So we're super glad that you are all here. I hope you brought your curiosity with you. And with that, Leslie, you want to tell us who you are, what you do, and why you like it?
Yeah, I am Dr. Leslie Hamachi. I'm an assistant professor at Cal Poly, which is a school in California. And I'm really excited to talk to everyone today about polymer recycling. So let me just share my slides here. Okay, I think that should, oh, looks like my screen sharing is paused. Is that working? I think that should be working now.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so as a little bit of additional context, this is a map. Here's a map here of California, so everyone can see that Cal Poly is kind of in the middle of California. It's about halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's one of the CSUs, and so I do a lot of research with master's students and undergraduate researchers, all kind of themed around polymer recycling. And this is just this is the building that I work in. So I want to start off with a little bit of introduction to what is a polymer, why were they developed, and what some of the kind of current research is that scientists like I am doing to try to help improve polymer recycling. And then we can get into some of your questions that everyone has. So what is a polymer? So we can think of polymers as these long strings of molecules, these very large strings. We usually think about a molecule as being, kind of a small object, kind of like a bead. And a polymer is a really long string of these beads all together. So you can think about that kind of like beads that are strung together to make a necklace. And we as scientists, we can choose whether we string together, beads of the same color. We can string together beads of alternating colors. We can make our string very short, so it's a little bracelet. We can make it very long, so it's a necklace. And in controlling how we're assembling these, we get different properties out of this material. And so that's essentially what polymer scientists do. We're trying to really assemble all of these larger structures. And so you might wonder, well, what are these useful for? Why do we need these? And the really interesting thing is that polymers were developed as these better alternatives to these natural materials. So the first ever polymer that was made, that was actually back in 1869 by John Wesley Hyatt, who was trying to make a replacement material for billiard balls, which was typically made out of ivory from elephant tusks. And so there was this whole challenge of, it's not sustainable to be killing elephants to get this very hard material that you can use to make billiard balls. So could scientists try to come up with some alternative material that didn't involve harvesting ivory from animals? Another type of material would be, replacements for wood or other types of stone, other materials like that. So with the flexibility of being able to string together these different beads on our necklaces, we're able to get materials that have properties that are very similar to that of ivory or to stone or other types of natural materials. And we also were able to extend this to making materials that had new and better properties, such as things like Kevlar for bulletproof vests and things like that that kind of expand the properties beyond what is just found in nature. And so today, there's many different types of polymers out in the world. The most common ones that you've interacted with come in the form of these different plastics. So these plastics are examples of polymers. And what I always like to have people do is If you have any kids at home, or if you would like to do this, after this talk, try to go on a scavenger hunt around your home or your apartment and try to look for any of the plastic objects that are around. And if you look at the bottom, you can usually see what plastic resin codes you have. And most of these plastic resins that are out there in your commercial products are going to have, you might see the number 1 or the number 2. These polyethylenes, those are commonly used to make your water bottles or these different plastic containers for, maybe your shampoo or soap bottle, something like that. So that's a very common type of plastic that you might have. There's many other different types, though, with all of these other different resin codes. And a really interesting challenge is, when we're recycling all of these, there are lots of challenges associated with mixing together different types of polymers. So if we go back to our necklace analogy, if I put, a gold necklace mixed in with a pearl necklace, mixed in with a regular bead necklace that someone made, if I try to just combine those all, I'm going to cut all the strings and try to mix all those beads together, that would end up with a very kind of weird looking necklace. Maybe it doesn't have the right properties or the right look that I wanted. So that kind of represents a challenge with recycling some of these materials. Another really big challenge comes from the consumer side of things. So this is some data from a paper that was published recently. And what they've shown is that from the 2015 data of all of the polymers that were produced into various products, most of that plastic waste does not get recycled. In fact, only about 14% is collected for recycling. And so this is something that, we want to try to fix, because we have all of this plastic that's not getting recycled, that's starting to sit in landfills, or sometimes it's burned, sometimes it's leaking into the environment and starting to pollute the environment, all of which are not very good. And so I want to mention a couple other points about this. Gets into what scientists are doing to try to help solve this problem. And so I want to talk about some of the chemical bonding that is present in these polymers. So we have some materials, so these thermoplastics, and that would be these long linear strands of polymers. So kind of like a single strand necklace. And so these are less durable and also way more easy to recycle. You can think about that, like having a whole bunch of spaghetti strings in a pot. You can kind of, if you heat up the pot, you can kind of move around the spaghetti strings and form a new configuration. So it's really easy to take materials like the polyethylene that make up your plastic water bottles and try to recycle that. In fact, there's a lot of companies out there, there's Rothy's who takes plastic water bottles and turns them into new shoes that people can buy and wear. So that's a really cool consumer product that makes use of recycling. However, there are also materials called a thermoset, where instead of just being a long linear strand, a single stranded necklace, it's almost more like a net. And so it's very hard to kind of reconfigure those materials. So an example of a thermoset is a tire. And so we want our tires to be very, very durable, but tires have a chemical structure with these, we call this a crosslink. So it's a type of, it basically is connecting all of our necklace strands together, forming kind of like a net. And so it's very rigid. It has great mechanical properties, like our tire is not going to melt when we're driving down the highway, but that also makes it very difficult to recycle. So right now, people are not able to recycle tires. You might see them sitting in landfills. You might see people burning tires. Or you might see people downcycling tires. And so what that means is you can cut up the tire into very small pieces of rubber. And sometimes people make, the mats on playgrounds out of tires that have been downcycled. And so that's taking this material like a tire that has a certain function, and then taking it and turning it into something with, slightly, I think we slightly different function that's maybe not as demanding of a application kind of condition. So one way that scientists are working on improving recycling is by trying to work on chemical recycling back to the monomers. So one way that you can think about this is, for a long time, for the first 100 years that polymers have been around, people have really focused on ways to synthesize those necklaces, to take the beads and string them together to make the necklaces. Now we're really interested in, how do we develop ways to carefully and controllably unstring those necklaces and reharvest all of those beads from the necklace. And then we can make a new necklace. We can make any new necklace that we want. We could make the same necklace, but longer. We could make the same one, but shorter. We could start to make alternating beads. Like we could turn that into any new type of material. And so this would we think about this as a closed looped cycle, where we're going from our monomers to products to post-consumer waste back to monomers. So that would be a closed loop cycle. Another way that scientists are working on polymer recycling is that there's this very new class of polymer that has been developed. It's called a covalent adaptable network. So that's a little bit of a mouthful, but we like to call that a CAN. When I was doing postdoc research at Northwestern, we would say, we can do it. we can help the recycling efforts. So a covalent adaptable network, what this means is that instead of having these permanent crosslinks that are linking our necklace strands together, we're going to have something that is dynamic. So maybe think about that as like a clasp that's sometimes holding those strings together and sometimes not holding them together. And we want to control that with some kind of input, like maybe UV light, maybe heat, something like that, so that at operating temperatures where we want our material to serve some function, it can have those same properties as these thermoset materials, kind of like a tire, but that under other conditions, we're able to start to recycle those. So one very cool example of this from the time that I was a postdoc, this is an example that was recently published last year, where we used this technique to recycle some polymer foam waste. So a thermoset polymer foam that would normally have to be recycled. It's the material that's usually found in car seat cushions. So similar to tires, you would usually have to just throw that in the landfill or burn it. It's called polyurethane foam. And so we use this type of strategy to be able to recycle this foam, this polyurethane foam waste found in your car cushions, and we were able to recycle this into other polyurethane materials. So it kind of is a demonstration of taking these materials that we couldn't recycle before, and we're now able to recycle them. I wanted to give a quick shout out to my colleague Dalen Shepard, who's a very talented graduate student at Northwestern University who really spearheaded this effort. It was in collaboration with other folks at the University of Minnesota as well, all funded by the NSF's Center for Sustainable Polymers. So there's tons of different groups of scientists out there currently working on ways like this to try to make polymers more recyclable. Before I wrap up, I wanted to mention one other thing that we're doing to address polymer sustainability. So another thing that we can do is we can use biomass derived monomers. So I couldn't not talk about this today. So some people are trying to take the polyethylene, that makes up your plastic, your plastic water bottle, and that's a material where the monomers or the beads that were making up those polymer necklaces, we get those from oil, but we're able to take monomers that are made from natural sources such as corn, and so we're able to make something called PLA, which has a very similar type of properties to the polyethylene, but instead of being sourced from oil, it's being sourced from corn. And so trying to go to these monomers that are made from biomass derived sources, that's another thing that we're trying to do. I also want to shout out to a student, Amanda Tsai from my research group, who is currently trying to work on making kombucha leather. So we're trying to make these biopolymers that are formed through the fermentation of kombucha. And so we're making this cellulose polymer that is strung together of many different sugar molecules, just regular sugar that you can buy in the grocery store. And we're trying to make this artificial leather that doesn't rely on animals to have similar properties to leather. So yeah, that's a little brief introduction to some polymers, polymer recycling, and some of the current efforts that scientists are involved in. And this is a little picture of my research group. We had a socially distanced outdoor gathering. I'd like to shout out to some of the students who are involved in doing research with me at Cal Poly. Yeah, you can check out some of our work at thehamachi-group.com. And I'd be happy to jump to some of people's questions now.
This was so cool. I did not know anything about this, so this has been so fun for me to watch. So thank you so much for sharing all that with us. We've got a bunch of questions, and everybody in the audience, please keep submitting your questions. Let's get into it. So one of the things that really shocked me about, and our audience as well, shocked about your talk, did you say that 32% of plastic that is made ends up just like in the environment?
Yeah, I think I need to go back to that slide. That was let me try to look at that reference. Yeah, that was the data that what was in this paper.
That's wild. So our fourth grader from Utah asks, why do so many people litter plastic?
I mean, I think that's a good question that I would encourage you to ask somebody. If you see somebody throwing plastic on the ground, ask them, why are you doing this? I think that there's, people don't think it really matters. People think that what you personally do is just one person out of the many people that are living on Earth. So it doesn't really matter what you individually do. But I think that we really need to have a collective responsibility, and try to hold each other accountable so that we don't destroy our planet.
Yeah, and do you think that maybe part of it is that people don't know that what they're like throwing away ends up in like the environment? Like I think a lot of times it's not necessarily people just throwing stuff out their windows, it's that they think they're putting it somewhere useful, and then along the way things kind of get loose. Is that as big a part as individuals?
Oh yeah. So that's a really important point. So yeah, I think that is another thing that the scientists are trying to address today, because there are lots of ways that some of this plastic waste can leach out into the environment. There was a recent study that was talking about how when you machine wash your nylon jacket, these very small pieces of that synthetic material, which we call microplastics, that those, you can't even see them, but they can end up going into your drain water and then going into the ocean. So they're these very, very tiny pieces of plastic. You don't even notice that that's happening, but that is another source of the plastics entering the environment. And so it's possible that the 32% in this figure refers to that as well. Yeah, and so I would have to double check this reference to see exactly what that number is referring to.
Awesome, thank you. So about how many people recycle? This is from Lauren, a third grader from Ohio.
Ooh, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I can't answer that.
That's okay.
But yeah.
Sounds good. So how long have you been studying polymers? This is from a fourth grader from Utah.
So I have actually been studying polymers only for a few years now. I would say about 3 years now. And so I guess it's never too late to try to learn something new, to study something new. I studied something called quantum dots during my PhD. So that's a totally different material. You can think about that almost like pigments and dyes. So I studied that for about, like 8 years or so, through my undergraduate and graduate school. And then I decided I wanted to learn more about these polymers and other types of materials. So I've been studying this for about, yeah, I would say about 3 years now.
Cool. Quantum dots are complicated, but for this audience, but super cool. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question is from Chantal. Chantal, is it difficult to produce these bioplastics in big scale?
So I think it depends on the exact types of monomers and the exact structures that you're using. In general, I would say it's a lot more difficult to produce them on large scale simply because all the infrastructure for mass production of polymers is set up around processing the oil derived monomers. So I think it would be possible to scale up some of these other processes, but we just need to try to get those into some of the production plants. I do know that the cups made from corn, the PLA cups, those are being currently mass produced. A lot of cafeterias will have them. Sometimes it's a plastic cup with a little green leaf on it, and it might say PLA or something like that to let you know that it was made from corn.
Awesome. So there were a couple questions here that basically get at the same thing. Like, how do you actually recycle a thing? Like, we know that we put things in our recycle bin and they're taken away somewhere. I always imagine them just getting like melted down, but like, what does it really look like when you're recycling a thing?
So that's actually like a fascinating question. And I think it's a little bit different city to city. But what I learned that happens in Minnesota, where the Center for Sustainable Polymers was based, where I did some research, they gave us a tour of this recycling plant where they basically they don't need you to pre-sort all the recycling. They just take all of the like cardboard and plastic and glass, like all of that is mixed together. And there's this very elaborate conveyor belt that can sort out the cardboard and separate that from the plastic and separate that from the glass. And so it's it's mind blowing because they can really accurately sort out all these different components. And then another important piece of it, so if I go back another slide, there's different plastic resins. And so this machine can sort out the different plastic resin codes so that it sorts out all the number ones go into, one big container. All the number sixes go into another container. And we have all these very elaborate sensors set up because the chemical bonding in the different plastics is very different. And so they can use these light-based techniques to kind of to analyze what is the molecule, like what was that monomer, what was that bead that's making up this necklace, and based on the ones that are compatible with each other, they can put those into the same bin. Um, Although I think one important factor is that if all of these materials, come in all dirty or greasy, or there's a lot of food still on them, it becomes more difficult for the machine to sort and separate all of the materials. And they were also saying that one big problem is that if they mess up and they put too many of the of one plastic into a bin that's not that bin, then sometimes the bigger recyclers who take that recycled material and then they make it into a new product will say, oh no, we had too much of extra stuff, maybe it was a different polymer or some other thing that got mixed in. um, I also want to mention it's like this one thing that was so interesting to me was that if you think of a soda bottle, there's like a plastic soda bottle. There are many different types of plastics that make up your one soda bottle. So I've been kind of simplifying by saying that these plastic water bottles or soda bottles are made of the polyethylene, so the plastic number one, because the cap is actually made from a different plastic. Sometimes the label that's put on, sometimes that's made of a different plastic, or sometimes the adhesive is made of a different material. So there was a lot of discussion when we toured this recycling plant where they were saying, you know, like the plastic for the bottle and the plastic for the cap, that's not compatible. So the machine actually is able to cut all the tops off of the water bottles. But they were saying that a big aspect of polymer recycling, moving forward would be, let's try to have the companies make products where all of the plastics that are used in one product are all compatible. And once you know that that's a problem, that seems like a no-brainer that we would try to do that. And so there are many things that the companies can do and that the consumers can do. And I think it's up to the scientists to try to help disseminate some of that information. Because until we toured this recycling plant, I, as someone who worked on polymers, didn't even know about all of this.
Right. Wow. That's good to know. Well, thanks. Um, okay, the next question's from Martha. How many times can you recycle plastic?
Oh, so that's another really good question. Um, if we think about the model where we're going from monomers to polymers, then back to monomers, um, that in theory should allow you to recycle, an infinite number of times if you have an actual closed loop cycle. I would say in practice, in some of our lab experiments, specifically speaking to the foam recycling example that I talked about, we found that every time you would recycle it, some of the properties, it didn't have the full recovery of the properties. So after about 3 different times, you could start to see a noticeable difference in the quality of the recycled material. And so I think that's why people are so interested in trying to develop the chemical recycling back to monomers, so that you could have this kind of infinite um, recyclability.
Cool. Um, so how can people help raise awareness of like the all the complexities of the situation that we can do to make things better?
Well, I think that it really depends on your city level, like how your city is processing all of the plastics and recyclables, because some of them have these fancy machines that sort out all the cardboard and the glass and the plastics, but at the recycling plant, they were telling us that it's not like that everywhere. So it's important to know, does your recycling plant, do they take certain types of materials or do they not? And some people also, um, I think some people think that pizza boxes with kind of greasy dripping, some people think, oh, this is recyclable. But in many cases, they don't want you to recycle that. But it's important just to double check and to make sure, because every recycling plant has some slightly different uh, uh, rules. I also learned that some places uh, really do not want you to try to recycle, the plastic bags that you get at a grocery store. Um, and sometimes there are other places in your community though where they want to try to collect those. So I know that sometimes people can get really creative, and that you can actually knit things out of your old plastic bags from grocery stores, just using that plastic as like a yarn. And so it's important to really look into what is kind of the right thing to do kind of at your city level.
Awesome. Ariana would like to know, as consumers, what are common products which add to polymer waste?
Let's see. So I would say the biggest one is fast fashion, so the clothing that you wear. So there's a lot of clothing that's made out of these synthetic polymers, so something like nylon, or these like polyester blends. And so that's something where if you go to your local mall and you're buying the latest fashion, and maybe it's designed to be really trendy, really cheap, but then it's going to fall apart. And so if you then just throw that away and get a new one a couple months later, that is adding a lot of this waste into the environment, because all of that has to go somewhere. There's this one, I don't remember I think it's called The True Cost. And it's a documentary that kind of covers the fast fashion industry. And it really opened my eyes to, where does all of this discarded clothing go? It's often shipped overseas and sold for very cheap, or it sits in a landfill somewhere. And so I would say that one of the things would be the clothing that you wear. And I think that if you can try to buy clothing that might last a little bit longer, and maybe you're not getting the newest, latest thing to wear, that will help out.
For sure. Thanks. Sheila would like to know, what inspired you to get into the field of polymer recycling?
So that's a very interesting question. So what inspired me to start studying polymers was actually an experience that I had teaching at the Fashion Institute of Technology when I was in graduate school. So sewing and fashion design was always a hobby of mine. In college, I was in the fashion design club, and made some artistic designs. But I always thought of myself as a nanoparticle chemist. Someone studying these different colored little pigments and dyes. But then I had this experience in graduate school where I was able to teach a chemistry class at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and interacting with a bunch of fashion design majors. And it was so inspiring to me, because there was this idea that there's so much interest in developing more sustainable materials, specifically in like the textile and kind of fashion design space. And so that was something where I felt like I had a background on some of the pigments and dyes, and how color works um, in that kind of artistic design space. But I didn't know as much about polymers and synthesizing the materials that go into textiles. And so I was really interested in trying to um, expand my research experiences to learn more about polymers. And so then that's why, after I finished my PhD, I did a postdoc where I was able to learn more about polymers.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Camilla wants to know, can it affect the rainforest if we don't recycle?
So I think that um, it's very complicated to predict exactly how not recycling will affect the environment because there's so much that we don't know. But I think that a lot of the impacts can be very far reaching. Um, for example, like having huge piles of plastic trash that are floating around in the ocean. What happens with that is, if you have all these large pieces of plastic that are floating around and slowly breaking up into smaller and smaller pieces, fish will start to eat that. Fish will start to eat these small pieces of plastic, and then when larger fish eat those smaller fish, it really starts to concentrate some of these kind of small pieces of plastic that were there at very low concentrations. And so over time, that's going to affect various ecosystems. And so I'm not sure how exactly that affects the rainforests, but what I do know is that it definitely will have an environmental impact.
Yeah, this stuff is all broadly connected for sure. Nikki would like to know, is it better to use compostable or recyclable packaging? Which of these two is less wasteful? This is from Lucas, a second grader.
So I would say that the best thing to do would be to use a reusable type of container or packaging, if you can. If you can, bring your food to school in the same reusable packaging, that would be the best. I think as far as some of the other options, recyclable versus compostable, I think uh, there's different ways that people can assess which one would be better. That's called a life cycle analysis, where people have to look into, what was the energy that was put in to make the compostable material versus a recyclable material. Where does it then go? And so trying to evaluate that whole life cycle of the object. And so something that I think that as a chemist I don't think about enough is the whole economics and all of the larger processes that go into evaluating whether one object is better than another. And so I guess I'm mainly focused on, let's try to design a new material that will be more recyclable, or let's try to design a material that you can compost. So I feel like I'm not completely qualified to comment on some of the specifics of recycling versus composting, because I'm more of the expert in how do we make more materials able to be recycled, or something like that.
Cool, thanks. So let's see. Here's a question about the process of recycling polymers. So does the process of recycling these polymers end up creating pollution in the process itself?
So I would say when we're recycling polymers, some of the processes, like you have to heat up some of the polymers to get them to melt. Like your water bottles, you have to heat those, melt those, and reform them into a new shape. And so yeah, there's some amount of energy that's getting put into the recycling process, but it's all about trying to analyze, like, if you're able to put in less energy inputs to make a recycled product, then that's a benefit. I think also, if you're taking something that would have been waste and preventing that from just going into the environment, that is another really positive aspect of that.
Cool. The next question is from Gavin. Why is polymer so hard to break down, and why does it take so long to break down in the environment?
So um, I really appreciate that question, because that is like, that's the main challenge that we're grappling with right now in the polymer community. Because when these materials were being first made, we were really focused on synthesizing ones that would be very robust and have all these specific properties. And it's only very, very recently that we've started to think about, that back end of it and trying to recycle the materials. So like if you think about it, polymers really became very popular during World War II when they started mass producing all these, nylon ropes and other plastics and materials that would, body armor, Kevlar, things like that were helpful for people that, had all these new properties. But that was something that these materials were specifically designed and engineered to be strong and to be sturdy and to really last. And we didn't really realize, or people didn't have the foresight to think, okay, well, in 100 years, this is going to be a problem. If you design something to last forever, then what's going to happen to it? That's becoming a problem.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering all these questions. This has been really amazing. I have learned so much today. So before we wrap up, we have two questions that we like to ask everybody. The first question is, if you had the attention of everyone in the world and you could tell them one thing about recycling, what would it be?
So I think that the one thing I would say is that um, a lot of people will think about the plastic waste in the environment and think, oh, polymers are bad. And that's something that I want to push back against, because polymers, they have so many useful functions in, the medical industry, in helping us store food and keep it fresh for longer, food packaging. There's so many really important uses of polymers that we really couldn't live without in the world today. And so it's really, we don't necessarily need to eliminate every usage of polymers. It's really important to try to be conscious consumers and to try to help, make decisions ourselves that will be good for the environment, and to also support companies that have this type of, recycling or kind of closed loop process when considering their products. So like a couple companies that I really like, there's um, so Patagonia has this whole nylon recycling program, because, if you machine wash your Patagonia jacket, some little tiny microplastics could end up in the environment. And so I think it's really important to try to support these kind of eco-conscious companies, and kind of vote with your dollars.
Awesome. Thank you so much. The other question that we ask is related. You still have everyone's attention in the whole world, and you could tell them one thing about anything you want. It can be as serious and significant or silly as you'd like.
Um, so I think we're really at this kind of very interesting place between kind of the science and design or art community, where, hundreds of years ago, these artists would find, like a colored rock or mineral and decide, oh, this has this very vivid blue color, I'm going to start to paint with this. And so they would use these pigments that are found in nature and make art with it. But nowadays, the artist can come up with, like, I want a material that has a certain property, and then the scientists, we can go in the lab and we can create exactly that material. And this is so cool. So one example of this type of material is the blackest black in the world. It's called Vanta Black. So if you haven't heard of that, I would really recommend looking that up on Google. So Vanta Black is the blackest black in the world, because any light that hits this black color, it doesn't escape. And so people are using it in various different art installations in very, very cool ways. There's also something called quantum blue. It's this invisible paint where when you shine a black light on it, it glows this vivid blue. And so there's all these really cool things that, artists can say, oh, hey, I want a material, or I want us to design a new painting medium that has these sorts of properties. And we're now at the place where we can now design those new art media around, what the artist kind of wants to use. And so I think that that's a very cool and interesting place to be.
Yeah. Well, that was not the answer I was expecting, and that is so awesome. So thank you. That's so cool. I'm gonna be thinking about that for the rest of the day. Um, awesome. Okay, is there anywhere that we can find you? Anything that you'd like to plug before we let you go?
Uh, I'm on Twitter, I guess. I usually tweet about, things relating to chemistry and science. It's at Leslie Hamachi. My research group at Cal Poly has a website. It's thehamachigroup.com. I highly encourage all of the listeners, if you're interested in science and research, when you have the opportunity, try to get involved with research, in college or at a university. It's always very exciting to have, more perspectives and opinions of people researching. So we're always looking to help expand the pool of future scientists and researchers out there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. This was awesome. Everybody at home, thank you for coming. Thank you for asking your questions. I had a lot of fun. This is awesome. Thank you again for being with us. On Tuesday, January 26th, that will be our next session. We are going to be talking about harnessing proteins and sunlight to make fuels. So it's going to be all about basically solar energy. So we've got a real environmental bent this week. So if you thought this was cool and you like the environmental aspect here, come Tuesday and we'll be talking about solar energy. So we hope to see you all then. Also, side note, Skype a Scientist is a nonprofit organization. And we really need everyone's support to keep our program going. So if you can support us by going to patreon.com/SkypeAScientist, we would really appreciate your support. As little as $3 a month really helps keep our program afloat. So if you can do that, we would really, really appreciate it. We need everybody to pitch in a little bit to keep our program going. Thank you again, Dr. Hamachi, for your time. I learned so much and I really, really thought this was cool. And Erin, thank you for signing for us. And we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.
Great.